Hello! Welcome to English for Shared. Here, you learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's go!
Joseph in Egypt, from dreams to victory. The Bible is full of remarkable stories, but few are as moving as that of Joseph in Egypt. It's a narrative that blends dreams, injustice, tears, and surprising twists. Joseph was just a young dreamer, full of hope and faith, but his life took unexpected turns that could have shattered his heart. However, instead of losing himself in suffering, he remained steadfast in God. From an early age, Joseph received dreams that showed him a grand future, but no one imagined how they would come true. His own brothers, driven by envy, became the first to try to destroy this destiny. What seemed like the end of a promising life was in fact the beginning of a much greater plan, guided by the hands of God. Joseph's journey was not easy. Sold into slavery, wronged and imprisoned, he faced situations that could have extinguished his hope. However, Joseph's faithfulness and God's presence in his life transformed every apparent defeat into a stepping stone to victory. What seemed like tragedy, God used as preparation. The most impressive thing about this story is realizing how God writes straight, even on life's most crooked lines. What seemed like the worst moment became the perfect setting for an extraordinary transformation. Joseph, the rejected young man, would become the most powerful man in Egypt after Pharaoh, saving not only a nation, but also his own family. Joseph's life is much more than an ancient tale. It is a living message for all of us. It shows us that faith, patience, and trust in God can change our destinies. Today, we will walk together through this incredible journey, divided into 5 chapters, and discover what we can learn from the journey of Joseph, the dreamer who never gave up. The rejected dreamer. Joseph was Jacob's beloved son, and this aroused conflicting feelings within his family. He was the second to last of 12 brothers, and from an early age had a special glow. His father, Jacob, showed him even greater affection, even gifting him with a colorful tunic, a symbol of honor and distinction. This gesture, which to the father was simply a demonstration of love, for his brothers became fuel for envy. But what really bothered his brothers were Joseph's dreams. He dreamed grandiose things, which seemed to reveal a future where he would be in a position of authority. In one of his dreams, sheaves of wheat bowed down before his sheaf. In another, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. To his brothers, these dreams sounded like arrogance. "Will he reign over us?" they murmured angrily. With each new dream recounted, the brothers' envy grew like wildfire. Joseph, still young and innocent, perhaps didn't fully grasp the weight of his visions. He simply shared what he saw, unaware that it only fueled the hatred in his home. In God's eyes, the dreams were revelations of purpose, but in the eyes of his brothers, they were an affront and a threat. Until one day, driven by resentment, the brothers decided to put an end to this nuisance. When Joseph went to the field to visit them, they plotted against him. First, they considered killing him, but then, overcome by greed, they opted to throw him into an empty pit. While he begged for his life, the brothers remained hard-hearted. Soon afterward, a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passed by on their way to Egypt. The brothers saw the perfect opportunity. They sold Joseph into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. To conceal their crime, they stained his colorful tunic with animal blood and handed it over to their father, claiming a wild beast had devoured him. Jacob, in despair, wept inconsolably over the loss of his beloved son. Meanwhile, Joseph was bound for Egypt, unaware of what awaited him. The young dreamer, once protected by his father's love, now walked alone to a distant land, taken as a slave. But even in that moment of pain, God was already setting the stage for something much greater. The slave who became leader. Upon arriving in Egypt, Joseph was sold into slavery in the house of Potiphar, an important official and captain of the Pharaoh's guard. For many, this would have been the end of their dreams, but Joseph didn't let sadness paralyze him. He worked with dedication, discipline, and honesty, and soon attracted the attention of everyone around him. Even in a strange land, God's hand was upon him, and everything he did prospered. Potiphar quickly realized that Joseph was no ordinary young man. He saw something different about him, something that brought blessing and order. Therefore, he entrusted Joseph with increasing responsibilities, eventually placing him as administrator of his entire household. From a simple slave, Joseph became the commander's trusted man, responsible for everything in Potiphar's house. Everything seemed to be going well until a great trial arose. Potiphar's wife began to look at Joseph with evil intentions. Day after day, she tried to seduce him, but Joseph, faithful to God and loyal to his master, firmly refused. He said, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" His posture showed character and fear, but it also aroused fury. Tired of being rejected, Potiphar's wife plotted against him. In a day of lies and deceit, she accused Joseph of attempting to rape her. Potiphar, overcome with rage and without investigating the truth, believed his wife's words. Thus, the innocent young man was unjustly thrown into prison, even though he had committed no crime. For anyone, that would have been the end. From slave to prisoner, Joseph seemed to sink ever lower. Yet even behind bars, God's presence never abandoned him. His life was proof that when God has a purpose, not even human injustice can erase it. In that dark, cold place where many lost hope, Joseph kept his faith burning in his heart. He didn't know how or when, but he trusted that God was still writing his story. What for men was defeat, for God was just another chapter in preparation for something extraordinary. From prison to hope. In prison, Joseph could have given in to despair, but he chose another path. He remained faithful to God, and even in chains maintained his dignity. Soon, the jailer realized there was something special about him. Just as had happened in Potiphar's house, Joseph gained confidence and was placed to help manage the prison. Wherever he was, God's presence brought order, peace, and hope. It was in this somber environment that Joseph met two important men, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. They had been imprisoned for displeasing the king, and were restless, suffering from strange dreams that troubled them. Joseph, sensitive to their pain, asked what had happened and listened attentively to each story. With the wisdom that came from God, Joseph interpreted the dreams. To the cupbearer, he told him that in 3 days he would be restored to his position with Pharaoh. To the baker, however, he announced that in 3 days he would be condemned. Although it was a harsh message, Joseph spoke the truth firmly. And exactly as he said, everything happened. Before the cupbearer left prison, Joseph made only one request: that he be remembered when he returned to the palace. It was in the hope of finally being recognized and freed. The cupbearer promised, but upon returning to his life in the palace, he quickly forgot about the young man who had given him the interpretation. Time passed, and the days in prison became long and silent. Joseph, however, did not let bitterness take over his heart. He knew that men could fail, but he trusted that God never forgets. Even in the waiting, his spirit remained steadfast. There, in the shadows of the prison, Joseph was being prepared for something greater. What seemed like abandonment was actually the silence of a God working in secret. The dream had not yet been fulfilled, but each trial was part of the path that would lead him to it. Pharaoh's dream. 2 years had passed since the cupbearer had left prison and forgotten about Joseph. It seemed nothing would change until Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams. In the first, he saw 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 lean cows. In the second, 7 full ears of grain were swallowed by 7 dry ears, scorched by the wind. None of the wise men of Egypt could explain the meaning of these dreams. It was then that the cupbearer remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew who had interpreted his dreams in prison with complete accuracy. Pharaoh, intrigued and desperate for answers, ordered Joseph brought to him immediately. Joseph was taken from prison, shaved, and dressed in clean clothes to appear before the king. When he arrived, Pharaoh said to him, "I heard you can interpret dreams." With humility, Joseph replied, "It is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Thus, once again, Joseph recognized that his wisdom came from the Lord, not from himself. Upon hearing the dreams, Joseph, guided by God, explained the mystery. There would be 7 years of plenty and abundance throughout the land of Egypt, followed by 7 years of severe famine. He advised Pharaoh to prepare by storing food during the years of prosperity so that the people would have enough to eat in times of famine. Joseph's words deeply impressed Pharaoh and his advisors. They recognized that there was no one as wise and filled with the Spirit of God as he. Thus, the impossible happened. The young man who had been a slave and prisoner was appointed governor of all Egypt, the second most powerful man in the empire. Only Pharaoh was above him. Joseph received linen garments, a royal ring, and even an official carriage. The man who had been forgotten was now remembered and exalted before an entire nation. Those dreams of his youth were beginning to come true, and God's hand became increasingly clear in his life. The reunion and forgiveness. The years of plenty passed, and famine spread throughout the region, affecting not only Egypt, but also the neighboring lands. Jacob, in Canaan, heard that there was food in Egypt and sent his sons there to buy food. They never imagined that the powerful ruler before whom they would appear was the brother they had sold so many years before. When the brothers arrived, Joseph recognized them immediately, but they didn't realize who he was. Dressed as an Egyptian and bearing authority, he observed them closely. In his heart, Joseph felt a mix of emotions, painful memories of betrayal, but also compassion. Most impressive was seeing them bow before him, fulfilling the very dreams of his youth. Joseph tested his brothers to see if they had changed. He asked questions, demanded that they bring Benjamin, their younger brother, and observed their reactions. Gradually, he realized they were no longer the same men driven only by envy. There was regret and pain in their words, especially when they remembered their father's suffering. The moment came when Joseph could no longer hold back his tears. In a heartbreaking gesture, he ordered all the servants to leave and, weeping loudly, revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." His brothers were frightened and speechless, but Joseph reassured them, saying, "Do not be afraid. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to save many lives." The reunion was marked by forgiveness and restoration. Joseph embraced his brothers and wept with them. Then he sent for his father and his entire family to live in Egypt, where they would have food and protection during the famine. Jacob, now elderly, was in disbelief when he heard the news, but upon seeing his beloved son again, his heart filled with joy. Thus, Joseph not only became the savior of Egypt, but also the restorer of his own family. The dreamy boy who was once rejected became the man who forgave and brought life to many. His story ends as an eternal testament that when God is in control, even the greatest pain can turn into victory.
Conclusion. Joseph's life shows us that God's ways are not always easy to understand, but they always have a greater purpose. What seemed like the end for him, the rejection of his brothers, slavery, and imprisonment, was actually part of a process of preparation. Every tear, every injustice, and every silence were used by God to shape Joseph's heart and lead him to the right place at the right time. If we only focus on difficulties, we might think that the dreams God places in our hearts will never come true. But Joseph's story teaches us that nothing can stop the Lord's plans. Betrayals, losses, and even the mistakes of others are transformed into stepping stones to victory when we remain steadfast in God. Another powerful lesson lies in forgiveness. Joseph could have used his power to seek revenge, but he chose to forgive and restore his family. The true victor is not the one who holds grudges, but the one who frees their heart and allows love to speak louder. This forgiveness not only healed Joseph, but also brought hope and life to everyone around him. Like Joseph, we also face moments when we don't understand what is happening. But his story reminds us that God never abandons us. He is capable of transforming pain into victory, prison into freedom, and dreams into reality. So, if you're going through difficult times today, remember, God is writing your story, and the ending will be much better than you can imagine.